all of them walking into my home like they already owned it. Then my son looked me in the eye and said, calm as weather, "Everyone can live here, and if you don't like it, Dad, you're welcome to leave." I didn't raise my voice. I smiled, finished the party, and the moment the last guest left, I started making plans that none of them saw coming. Thank you so much for tuning into Dad's Revenge Stories. I deeply appreciate your presence here. Tell me in the comments which country or city are you supporting from. Also, please note, this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message I'm conveying to you is useful. The doorbell rang at 8:17 in the evening, and I remember thinking it was probably the Hendersons from 2 doors down, arriving fashionably late, the way they always did. I had a glass of red wine in my hand, a house full of people who actually wanted to be there, and for the first time in 8 years, something that felt dangerously close to happiness. I set my glass on the kitchen counter and walked to the front door, still smiling. Julian was standing on my porch. He had a suitcase in each hand and a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, Chloe stood with a rolling carry-on and a canvas tote over each shoulder. And behind her, parked at the curb under the yellow glow of the streetlight, a black SUV sat with its trunk open. Gerald and Patricia Morrow. Chloe's parents were pulling luggage out of the back like they were checking into a resort. "Hey, Dad." Julian stepped forward and hugged me with one arm, suitcase still in his other hand. "Great party." I didn't move. "Julian, what is this?" "We figured this place is big enough for all of us." He said it the way you'd mention the weather. Casual, practiced, like he'd rehearsed it enough times that it stopped sounding insane. "You've got 4 bedrooms, Dad. You're one person. It just makes sense." My mouth opened, but nothing came out. 28 people were standing in my living room. My neighbor Dorothy Mercer was watching from across the hallway with a glass of sparkling water halfway to her lips. My old colleague Marcus Bell had gone very still near the bookshelf, and Elena Vasquez, Dorothy's friend, a woman I'd met only twice before tonight, a woman with a warm laugh and paint-stained fingers who'd brought homemade empanadas to the party, was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Chloe walked past me without saying a word. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't make eye contact. She just walked through my front door, through my foyer, and started up my staircase wheels of her carry-on, clicking against each hardwood step, like a metronome counting down to something I wasn't ready for. "Chloe." My voice came out harder than I intended. "Where do you think you're going?" She paused on the 4th step and looked down at me over her shoulder. "Getting settled," she said. "We had a long drive." Gerald Morrow appeared behind Julian, hand extended like we were meeting at a business function. He was a heavy-set man with a politician's handshake and eyes that calculated everything they landed on. "Arthur, beautiful home. Really. You've done well for yourself." Patricia was already inside, complimenting my living room curtains to a woman she'd never met. Something cold moved through my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. The specific feeling of watching a plan unfold that you weren't supposed to know about. I excused myself from Gerald's handshake and followed Chloe upstairs. She had pushed open the door to my bedroom, the room I had painted Evelyn's favorite shade of gray-blue, the room where I'd spent 8 years learning to sleep alone again, and she was already unzipping the carry-on on top of my bed. "Chloe." I stepped into the doorway. "That's my room." "There are 3 other bedrooms, Dad." Julian appeared behind me, and I noticed he'd already brought one of the suitcases up. He set the suitcase down on my floor, with the particular ease of a man who had already decided the outcome of a conversation before it began. "Everyone can live here, and if you don't like it, Dad, you're welcome to leave." He said it the way you say something you have been rehearsing. Casual. Certain. like the house had already changed hands and no one had told me yet. The room felt like it was shrinking. I looked at the nightstand beside my bed. The small black velvet box was sitting exactly where I'd left it that morning, where it sat every morning. Inside was the only watch Evelyn had ever owned, a Longines she'd received from her mother. Nothing extravagant, worth maybe $300 to a stranger, and every single thing to me. She had pressed it into my palm the last morning she was lucid enough to know my face. "Keep this," she had said, "so you remember I was here." Chloe's hand reached toward the nightstand. "Don't touch that." The words came out low and sharp. Both of them looked at me. I held Chloe's gaze until her hand withdrew. Downstairs, the party continued. I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, Marcus telling a story that always got louder near the end. 28 people who had come to celebrate something I had worked 31 years to earn. Outside my bedroom, my son and his wife were rearranging my life with the confidence of people who had decided somewhere along the way that what was mine was also theirs. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I turned around, walked back down the stairs, and returned to my guests with my face arranged into something I hoped resembled a smile. Dorothy fell into step beside me at the bottom of the stairs. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me my glass of wine and said very quietly, "Arthur, whatever you need." I nodded. I drank. I laughed at the right moments and refilled people's glasses and told Marcus his story was better the third time. And the whole time in the back of my mind, a single thought was running in a clean, quiet loop. Tomorrow morning, before they wake up. I caught Elena's eye from across the room. She was standing near the window and she gave me a small nod, not of understanding exactly. More like acknowledgement. Like she could see that something had shifted in this house tonight, and she wanted me to know she saw it. I nodded back. Then I turned to my guests, raised my glass, and said the words I'd been planning to say all evening. "To this house," I said, "and to building something worth protecting." The last guest left at 10:45. I stood at the front door and watched their taillights disappear down Birchwood Lane. And when the street went quiet, I locked the deadbolt, turned off the porch light, and stood there in the dark foyer for a long moment, with my hand still on the door. Upstairs, I could hear movement, drawers opening, the groan of my old floorboards under unfamiliar weight. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, and sat down at the table I had carried up from my old apartment in Yonkers. Let me tell you who I was before that night, so you understand exactly what they were trying to take. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Albany, with a father who worked double shifts at a printing press, and a mother who stretched every dollar until it apologized for being so small. I learned early that nothing worth having arrived without being earned, and I carried that lesson like a stone in my chest for 64 years. I studied mechanical engineering at SUNY Buffalo, graduated in the bottom third of my class, because I was also working 22 hours a week at a machine shop to pay rent, and I didn't care about the ranking. I cared about the diploma. I met Evelyn at a company picnic in the summer of 1989. She was wearing a yellow dress and arguing with a coworker about whether the hot dogs were beef or pork. And she was absolutely right about both the hot dogs and everything else she ever argued about for the next 28 years. We were married 11 months later in a small ceremony at St. Catherine's in White Plains. We couldn't afford a honeymoon, so we drove to Montauk for a long weekend, stayed in a motel that smelled like salt and old carpet, and walked the beach every morning before anyone else was awake. Julian was born 2 years later. I remember holding him in the delivery room, this furious, red-faced person who had no idea what world he'd arrived in, and thinking that I would do absolutely anything to make sure he never had to work as hard as I did just to stay level. I meant it. I meant every version of it. For 31 years, I showed up at Callaway Industrial Supply, first as a junior engineer, eventually as operations director, and I gave that company the best hours of every day I had. Evelyn taught fourth grade at an elementary school in Scarsdale and coached the after-school drama club, and still somehow had dinner on the table at 6:30 most nights, and never once made me feel guilty for the nights I missed. We saved. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way people on television save all spreadsheets and sacrifice montages. We saved the way ordinary people do, by not buying things we didn't need, by taking vacations we could afford, by agreeing without ever quite discussing it that the future was worth more than the present felt. Evelyn got her diagnosis in the spring of 2014. Stage 3 breast cancer, caught late because she kept saying she was fine, and the appointments kept getting pushed back, and she never wanted to make a fuss. She fought for 3 years with the particular stubbornness of a woman who had strong opinions about hot dogs and was never once wrong. She lost in March of 2017 on a Tuesday morning, with her hand in mine and sunlight coming through the hospital blinds in long flat strips across the floor. She pressed her watch into my palm that morning, a Longines her mother had given her when she turned 30. The crystal was scratched. The clasp had been repaired twice. It was worth maybe $300 to a stranger. "Keep this," she said. Her voice was barely above a breath by then. "So you remember I was here?" I remembered. Every single day for 8 years, I remembered. After Evelyn died, I stayed in our apartment in Yonkers for 2 more years because I couldn't figure out where else to go. Then I retired, and I sold almost everything that didn't matter, and I started putting money away with a focus that felt close to obsession. I had promised Evelyn something, not out loud, not in any formal way, but in the private language that long marriages develop. I had promised her a house with a yard. A real yard with enough room for the garden she always talked about. A porch where you could sit in the evening and hear nothing louder than the neighbors and the birds. Oh, I bought the house on Birchwood Lane in Westchester 14 months ago. 4 bedrooms, hardwood floors throughout a backyard with a Japanese maple in the corner that turned the color of fire in October. I walked through the front door the first time and stood in the empty living room and said out loud to no one, "Okay, Evelyn, here we go." Julian had come to see it 3 months before the housewarming. He walked through every room, asked about the square footage. Opened closet doors, tested the water pressure in the master bath. I thought he was being thorough. I thought he was interested the way a son is interested in his father's new home. I was pouring coffee in the kitchen when he said, almost to himself, "Lot of space for one person, Dad." I handed him his mug and smiled. "I'm planning to grow into it," I said. He smiled back. His eyes went to the smart lock keypad beside the back door, and I saw him watching as I tapped in the code. I didn't think anything of it. He was my son. I had known his face since it was red and furious in a delivery room 34 years ago. I sat alone at my kitchen table the night of the housewarming, bourbon untouched in front of me, and I thought about that moment in the kitchen, the way his eyes had tracked to the keypad, the smile that didn't quite reach his eyes tonight either. Upstairs, a drawer slammed hard enough to rattle the framed photo on the hallway wall, Evelyn and me on that Montauk Beach 1989, laughing at something neither of us could remember anymore. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "How bad?" he said. No greeting. He'd seen enough of life to know that calls after 11 meant something had gone wrong. "Bad enough," I said. "I need you here at 5:30. "I'll bring coffee," he said, and hung up. I sat there until midnight, memorizing the sound of my house the way it had felt before. Tonight, the particular creak of the third stair, the way the refrigerator hummed in the quiet, the distant sound of the Merritt Parkway if the wind was right. I had built this, not just with money, With 31 years of early mornings and honest work, and a grief so heavy it had its own gravity. Nobody was going to take it from me. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the clock above the stove ticked to 5 a.m., and the bourbon from the night before was still exactly where I had left it. 2 fingers in a glass untouched, gone warm. I had not slept. Not because I was too upset to sleep, but because I had too much to do, and sleep felt like a luxury that belonged to people who hadn't just watched their son drag luggage into their bedroom like he owned the place. Marcus knocked on the back door at 5:28. I let him in, and he handed me a large coffee from the 24-hour diner on Central Avenue without saying a word. He sat down across from me, wrapped both hands around his own cup, and looked at me the way men who have known each other for 20 years look at each other when something serious has happened and the time for softening it has passed. "Tell me what you need," he said. "I need a moving company," I said. "One that opens early and doesn't ask questions." Marcus pulled out his phone. "My nephew runs a crew out of Mount Vernon. They start at 6. He was already dialing before I finished nodding. While Marcus made the call, I opened the smart lock app on my phone, the same app I had used to let Julian in through the back door the afternoon he came to see the house 3 months ago. The afternoon his eyes tracked to the keypad, with an interest I had been too trusting to register. The app allowed me to reset all access codes remotely instantly without being anywhere near the door. I changed the front door code, the back door code, and the garage entry pad, all 3 in under 90 seconds. Then I set the system to manual override only, which meant no code would work until I physically re-enabled it. Julian had whatever number he'd memorized from watching me. Now that number opened nothing. I set the phone down and felt something loosen slightly in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the first small step of taking back what was mine. Marcus's nephew arrived with 2 other men at 6:15. They were quiet and professional, and they moved through my house the way people do when they understand that the work matters without needing to know why. I walked ahead of them up the stairs and opened the door to my bedroom. Bedroom, which now smelled faintly of Chloe's perfume, something sharp and expensive that had no business being in this room. Her carry-on was open on the bed. Julian's 2 suitcases were against the wall. Gerald and Patricia had taken the guest room at the end of the hall, and their bags were stacked in the corner with the practiced efficiency of people who traveled often and always expected to be accommodated. "Everything in this room," I told the crew, "and the guest room at the end of the hall. Every bag, every toiletry, every charger and jacket and shoe. If it wasn't here before last night, it goes." It took them 40 minutes. While they worked, I went to my bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching them carefully pack each item. One of the crew members, a young man maybe 25 with careful hands, picked up a small cosmetics bag from the bathroom counter and looked at me to confirm. "All of it," I said. He nodded and kept going. I was in the kitchen writing out the note when Dorothy appeared at my back window, still in her housecoat, coffee in hand. She raised an eyebrow. I held up the note so she could read it through the glass. She read it, pressed her lips together, and gave me a single firm nod that meant more than most speeches I had ever heard. The note read, "You came to my home uninvited and helped yourselves to rooms that were not yours. I have arranged for your belongings to be returned to your apartment in Yonkers. The cost of the service is attached. Do not contact me until you are prepared to have a very different kind of conversation." I taped it to Julian's larger suitcase. The crew loaded everything into their van and drove away at 7:40. I stood on the porch in the February cold and watched them go, breath clouding in the gray morning air. Then I went back inside, poured out the warm bourbon from the night before, rinsed the glass, and made a fresh pot of coffee. At 7:53, my phone began to ring. "Julian." I watched his name light up the screen 4 times before it stopped. Then a text, "Dad. What is this? Where is our stuff?" Then another. "Call me right now." Then Chloe. "This is unbelievable. You had no right." Then Gerald Morrow, a number I hadn't even known I had saved, Arthur. This is not how family handles things. I opened the Smart Lock app again and looked at the activity log. At 7:49, someone had attempted to enter a code at the front door. The system had rejected it. 4 more attempts over the next 3 minutes, each one rejected. Then nothing. I put the phone face down on the table. That was when I noticed it. The thing I had been half aware of since the moving crew left. I walked back upstairs to my bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, and confirmed what the cold feeling in my stomach had been telling me since 5 o'clock that morning. The black velvet box was there, but it was open, and the Longines watched the scratched crystal, the twice-repaired clasp, the only thing Evelyn had asked me to keep, was gone. My hand gripped the edge of the nightstand hard enough that my knuckles went white, and the wood creaked under my fingers. I stood there for 10 seconds, maybe 15, breathing through my nose, staring at the empty velvet indent where the watch had rested every morning for 8 years. Then I straightened up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. The security camera system I had installed last October, Marcus had strongly suggested it, after a rash of package thefts on Birchwood Lane, covered 4 angles: the front door, the back door, the living room, and the upstairs hallway. I clicked on the hallway camera. I scrolled back to 8:51 the previous evening, and I pressed play. The timestamp read 8:51 p.m. The hallway was dim. A figure moved from the master bedroom doorway toward the staircase. The figure paused, shifted something from one hand to the other, and continued down the stairs. The figure was Chloe. I sat back in my chair. My jaw was tight. My coffee had gone cold again. Outside, a cardinal landed on the Japanese maple in the backyard. Red as a warning against the gray February sky. And I thought about Evelyn telling me once that cardinals were supposed to be visits from people you had lost. I picked up my phone and called a number I had never needed to call before. "Victoria Shaw's office," said the voice on the other end. "This is Arthur Calloway," I said. "I need to speak with Ms. Shaw as soon as possible. I have security footage, I have a missing item of personal property, and I believe I have a great deal more that she needs to see." 3 days after the housewarming, I found a letter in my mailbox between a utility bill and a grocery circular. The return address was a law office in Yonkers Tillman and Associates, a name I didn't recognize. I stood at the end of my driveway in the cold and opened it right there, because I have never been the kind of man who delays bad news by carrying it inside first. The letter was 2 pages single-spaced, written in the particular language that people use when they want to sound more threatening than they actually are. The summary was this: Julian Calloway, acting through his legal representative, was formally requesting that I either grant him and his wife, Chloe, joint occupancy rights to the property at Birchwood Lane, Westchester County, or reimburse him the sum of $28,000, which the letter described as an educational investment fund provided by the Calloway family, that had been given to me with the implicit expectation of reciprocal support. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully along its original crease and put it in my coat pocket. I called Raymond from the driveway. My brother's son, my father's younger brother's boy, which made Raymond my first cousin once removed, though we had always simply called each other uncle and nephew because the alternative required more explanation than either of us had patience for. Raymond Calloway was 68 years old, retired from the post office after 34 years, and the most straightforwardly honest person I had ever known. He also happened to have been present at the reading of Evelyn's will. "Raymond," I said, I need you to come over, and I need you to bring whatever you have from when Evelyn passed. There was a pause. The envelope from the lawyer, whatever you have. I'll be there in an hour, he said. Don't throw anything away. He arrived at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a manila envelope that had been sitting in his filing cabinet for 8 years, sealed with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped when he pulled it off. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where the bourbon had gone warm 3 nights ago, and he laid the contents out carefully, the way a man does when he understands the weight of what he's handling. "Arthur," he said, and his voice had the particular roughness of a man choosing his words because the wrong ones would hurt more than the right ones. "Do you actually know where that $28,000 came from?" I felt something shift in my chest. "From Evelyn's life insurance." "Yes." He slid a document across the table toward me. "And do you know what Evelyn wrote in her policy beneficiary designation?" I looked at the page. It was a copy of Evelyn's life insurance beneficiary form, notarized in March of 2015, 2 years before she died, when she was still clear-headed enough to plan for everything she was afraid of leaving undone. The primary beneficiary was listed as Julian Michael Calloway, son. The designated purpose, written in Evelyn's own careful handwriting in the notes section, read, "For Julian's education and future. Not to be used for anything else." My throat tightened. She wrote it down. She wrote everything down. Raymond's voice was rough now, rougher than usual. "That $28,000 was never your money to give Arthur. It was Julian's inheritance from his mother. You were the trustee, you held it for him until he needed it for college, which is exactly what happened." I stared at the page for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the Japanese maple stood bare against the gray March sky. The same tree that had blazed orange in October when I first moved in, the same tree where the cardinal had landed, the morning I found Evelyn's watch missing. "He's telling people I gave him that money," I said. "He's trying to use it to claim I owe him something. I know what he's doing." Raymond reached into the envelope again and pulled out a second document. A letter from the estate attorney dated April 2017, confirming the disbursement of the insurance funds to Julian's college account. "And now you have what you need to prove he's lying." I picked up the estate letter and read it carefully. The disbursement was documented. The source was documented. The purpose was documented. Julian had received every dollar his mother intended for him to have, and I had never touched a cent of it. What Raymond said next hit me harder than anything in either document. "Arthur." He pressed his hands flat on the table and looked at me directly, the way he had looked at me at Evelyn's funeral when I couldn't stop shaking during the eulogy, and he had simply put his hand on my arm and held it there. "When Evelyn died, you were carrying $43,000 of debt. Did you know I knew that?" My jaw tightened. "Raymond, you borrowed against your retirement account to cover Julian's room and board for 2 years because the insurance money only covered tuition. You paid it back over 11 years, and you never told a single person." He tapped the table once firmly. "That boy is standing in front of a judge or trying to claiming you owe him $28,000. When the truth is, you spent your retirement, your savings, and 11 years of your life making sure he never went without." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something it couldn't reach. I picked up my phone and called Victoria Shaw. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been expecting to hear from me. "I have the original beneficiary designation from my wife's life insurance policy," I said. "I have the estate disbursement letter from 2017. I have security camera footage of my daughter-in-law removing personal property from my bedroom. and I have a letter from a Yonkers law firm making claims that these documents directly contradict. Bring everything to my office tomorrow morning, Victoria said. Her voice was calm and precise, the voice of someone who had heard worse and knew exactly what to do with it. 8 o'clock. And Arthur, don't respond to that letter. Not one word, not one text. Let me handle it from here. Understood, I said. I hung up and set the phone down. Raymond was still sitting across from me, watching me the way family watches you when they're not sure if you need space or company, and they've decided to wait until you tell them. Stay for dinner, I said. He nodded and reached for his coffee. I was going to anyway, he said. Before I reveal the dark secrets I discovered next, please comment, "Still here," to let me know you are following along. And please note, the upcoming part of the story contains some fictional elements and may not be completely factual. If you do not wish to listen further, you can turn off the video right here. Victoria Shaw's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Mamaroneck Avenue in White Plains, and it looked exactly like the office of a woman who had spent 18 years winning arguments that other people thought were unwinnable. Bookshelves, floor to ceiling. A desk that was clean in the way that serious people keep things clean, not bare, but organized with the precision of someone who knew where everything was and why. On the wall behind her chair, framed degrees from Fordham Law and NYU, and beside them a single printed quote that read, "Justice is not a gift. It is a demand." She was 53, maybe 55, with close-cropped silver hair, and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once slouched in a chair waiting for someone else to take charge of a situation. She shook my hand firmly, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and said, "Let's see what you brought." I laid everything out. The beneficiary designation, the estate disbursement letter, the letter from Tillman and Associates, the USB drive with the security camera footage. Victoria reviewed each document in silence, turning pages with the deliberate focus of someone reading a contract rather than a story. I sat across from her and waited. I had learned over 31 years of operations management that the people worth trusting are the ones who read before they speak. She finished the last page of the Tillman letter, set it down, and looked at me. "Their claim has no legal foundation," she said. "Educational gifts from a parent to an adult child are not recoverable loans under New York law. There is no signed promissory note, no written loan agreement, no documented expectation of repayment. And given that this money originated from your wife's life insurance beneficiary designation, money that was technically Julian's from the moment Evelyn passed, they couldn't recover it in court, even if they had a case, which they do not." She paused. "I'll draft a response letter this week that will make their attorney deeply regret taking this client." I almost smiled. Almost. Then she said, "Before we get to the footage, I need to show you something. When you called me 2 days ago, you mentioned you had a great deal more than you realized. I took the liberty of running a financial background check, standard procedure, when I take on property dispute cases. I hope that's acceptable." "Whatever you need," I said. She opened a folder and turned it to face me. It was a loan document, First Consolidated Bank of Yonkers account holder, Arthur James Calloway, loan amount $45,000, origination date November 14th, 2024. There was a signature at the bottom of the page that looked almost like mine. Almost. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the armrests of the chair and leaned forward. "I never signed this," I said. "I know." Victoria's voice was steady the way a surgeon's hands are steady, not because they feel nothing, but because feeling something and staying precise are not mutually exclusive. "November 14th was the 3rd day of your hospitalization for the TIA, the transient ischemic attack, what people commonly call a mini-stroke. You were admitted November 12th and discharged November 18th. You were not physically present at any bank branch during that period. A transient ischemic attack is what my doctor had called it. A brief interruption of blood flow to the brain, serious enough to require 5 days of observation, but not serious enough to leave permanent damage. I had told Julian about it the morning I was admitted because he was listed as my emergency contact. He had come to the hospital on the second day, brought flowers, sat beside my bed for 40 minutes, held my hand, when the nurse came to check my vitals and told me not to worry about anything at home. The flowers had been yellow, Evelyn's favorite color. The $45,000, I said carefully. Where did it go? Wired in 3 installments to a checking account registered to Chloe Marie Morrow Calloway over the course of 2 weeks following the loan origination. Victoria closed the folder. Julian accessed your filing cabinet at your Yonkers apartment during your hospitalization. We know this because your building's lobby camera shows him entering a loan on November 14th at 10:18 in the morning and leaving 40 minutes later carrying a document sleeve. He used the information from your financial records to apply for the loan in person at a branch in Yonkers, presenting a forged copy of your signature. My hands were pressing flat against my thighs, now hard enough that I could feel the seams of my trousers. The fluorescent light above Victoria's desk buzzed very faintly. I became aware of small things, the sound of a printer running somewhere down the hall, the weight of my own breathing. Forgery in the 2nd degree, Victoria said. New York Penal Law Section 170.10. It's a Class D felony, maximum sentence of 7 years. She let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. This is no longer a civil matter, Arthur. This is a criminal case. I thought about Julian sitting beside my hospital bed, his hand over mine. Don't worry about anything at home, Dad. I'll take care of it. He had taken care of it, just not in any way I had imagined. What do we do? I asked. My voice came out flat and even, which surprised me because nothing inside me felt flat or even. First, we file a police report with the Westchester County Financial Crimes Unit today. Second, I contact First Consolidated to flag the fraudulent loan and initiate dispute proceedings under New York banking law. You are not liable for a debt incurred through identity fraud, and the bank has an obligation to investigate. Third, she slid a legal pad across the desk with a list already written on it. We add this to the civil complaint I'm building because it changes the character of everything Julian has done from a family dispute into a coordinated pattern of financial exploitation. I picked up the legal pad. Victoria's handwriting was small and precise, each item numbered, each consequence noted beside it. There's one more thing, she said. She reached into a second folder and removed 2 documents, placing them side by side on the desk in front of me. I recognized one of them immediately. It was my will, the document I had signed 5 years ago, in this very building, in this very office, leaving everything to the Evelyn Calloway Foundation I had established in my wife's name. The other document looked identical at first glance. Same format, same typeface, same notary seal in the bottom corner. But the beneficiary on the second page was different. Instead of the foundation, the primary beneficiary read Julian Michael Calloway and spouse. Victoria watched my face. When did you last physically verify your will was in your filing cabinet? She asked quietly. The buzzing of the fluorescent light seemed to grow louder. My chest felt like something heavy had been set down on it without warning, and the particular pain of it was not the kind that comes from anger or fear, but from the specific, irreversible recognition of what you are looking at. He was in my apartment for 40 minutes, I said. Yes, said Victoria. He was. I have been present at a number of moments in my life that I would describe as before and after. The morning I married Evelyn, the afternoon Julian was born, the Tuesday in March. When Evelyn stopped breathing, and the room went a kind of quiet I had never heard before, and have never stopped hearing since. What happened in Victoria Shaw's office that morning became one of those moments. Not because of what the document said, because of what it meant that it existed at all. I picked up the forged will with both hands and read it the way you read something you already know is going to hurt you. And you read it anyway because not reading it feels worse. The format was identical to my original same paragraph structure, same legal language, same notary seal block at the bottom. But where my original named the Evelyn Callaway Foundation as primary beneficiary, this version named Julian Michael Callaway and spouse. The foundation was not mentioned anywhere in the document. 8 years of planning, 8 years of honoring what Evelyn had believed in, removed and replaced with 2 names on a line. My hands were not steady. I set the document down before I dropped it. "How did you find it?" My voice came out lower than I expected. Victoria leaned forward. "When you brought me your original will at our first meeting last week, I ran it through our document authentication process. We do this routinely in estate disputes. The metadata on the forged version indicates it was created digitally on November 16, 2024, 2 days after Julian accessed your filing cabinet." She turned her laptop to face me and showed me a side-by-side comparison. 2 columns of data, origination dates, file signatures, printer fingerprints. "He photographed your original, had someone recreate it digitally, with the beneficiary changed, printed it on aged paper to match the original's appearance, and substituted it in your files. The forgery is sophisticated, but it is not perfect. What gives it away? 3 things." She held up one finger. "The notary seal is a reproduction. Real notary seals have a slight embossment you can feel with your fingertip. This one is flat." Second finger. "The signature ink is uniform in density, which suggests it was printed rather than handwritten. Genuine signatures have pressure variations." Third finger. "And your original was drafted on our office letterhead with a specific watermark. The forged version uses generic legal paper." I pressed my fingertips against the edge of her desk. The wood was cool and solid and real, and I needed something real to press against. "He was waiting for me to die," I said. The words came out without planning. But once they were in the air between us, I understood they were true. The forgery was not about the housewarming. It was not about the $28,000 or the loan or even the watch. Those were opportunistic things Julian and Chloe had reached for because they were there. The will was different. The will had required planning and patience and the cold calculation of a person who had looked at his father and seen an expiration date. Victoria did not flinch. She had heard worse. I could tell by the way she simply waited for me to finish processing before she continued. Under New York Penal Law Section 170, forging a will constitutes forgery in the 2nd degree, the same classification as the fraudulent loan. Class D felony up to 7 years. She paused. But there is an additional dimension here. Under the New York Surrogates Court Procedure Act, submitting a forged will for probate, which Julian would have done had you passed away, carries separate penalties and would have triggered a full estate fraud investigation. He was not just planning to inherit your assets, Arthur. He was planning to woo it through documents that could not be questioned until it was too late for anyone to question them. I thought about Raymond sitting across from me at my kitchen table the night before, his hands flat on the wood, telling me that Julian had been waiting for me to die. He had said it then, and I had heard it, but it had not landed the way it was landing now in this office with the forged document in front of me and Evelyn's name nowhere on it. I called Raymond from Victoria's office. He picked up on the 2nd ring. "Raymond," I said, "it's worse than we thought." He was quiet for a moment. Then, in the careful voice he used when he was working very hard to stay steady, "Tell me." I told him about the will. I heard him exhale a long, slow breath that carried everything he wasn't going to say out loud, because saying it out loud would make it more real than either of us could manage at that moment in the morning. "Arthur," he said finally, "what do you need me to do?" "Nothing yet. Victoria is filing with the DA's office today. I needed someone else to know." "I know," he said. "I'm here." Victoria had already begun drafting the criminal referral to the Westchester County District Attorney's Office by the time I ended the call. She worked with the focused efficiency of someone who had been building toward this document since the moment I first walked through her door, and watching her work the quiet click of her keyboard, the precise way she referenced each piece of evidence by date and file number, settled something in my chest that had been loose and rattling since the night of the housewarming. I was not alone in this room, and the room had a very good lawyer. She printed the referral, signed it, and handed me a copy. "This goes to the Financial Crimes Unit and the Surrogates Court simultaneously," she said. "Given the combination of loan fraud and will forgery, we are looking at multiple felony counts. The DA's office will assign a detective." My phone rang 40 minutes later while I was still sitting across from Victoria, reviewing the civil complaint she was also preparing. The number had a 914 area code, Westchester County. "Mr. Calloway." The voice was measured professional, with the particular flatness of someone who delivered serious information many times a day and had learned that calm was more useful than dramatic. "This is Detective Carl Ramos, Westchester County Financial Crimes Unit. We received a referral from your attorney's office this morning. I'd like to come by your home tomorrow if that works for you. I have some questions, and I think you may have answers that will be very useful to us." I looked at Victoria. She gave me a single nod. "Tomorrow morning works fine," I told Detective Ramos. "I'll make coffee." Detective Carl Ramos arrived at 7:58 in the morning, 2 minutes before the hour, which told me something about him before he even opened his mouth. He was shorter than I had pictured from his voice on the phone, compact, maybe 5'9", with the kind of stillness that comes not from being relaxed, but from having learned a long time ago that people reveal more when you give them space to fill. He was somewhere in his mid-40s with a gray sport coat and a notepad he kept in his left breast pocket, and reading glasses he put on and took off the way some men handle worry beads. He shook my hand at the door and said, "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Calloway. I mean that genuinely." I poured 2 mugs, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Raymond had laid out Evelyn's documents, where the bourbon had gone warm the night of the housewarming, where I had written the note that went with Julian's luggage. I was beginning to think this table had seen more of my life in the past 3 weeks than most furniture sees in a decade. Ramos set his notepad on the table, uncapped a pen, and looked at me with the particular patience of a man who had learned that the best interviews were the ones where he said the least. "Start wherever feels right," he said. "I'll stop you if I need clarification." So I told him everything. Not the version I had been telling myself in fragments, the version where I focused on one thing at a time because the whole of it was too large to look at directly. I told him the complete version, beginning with Julian appearing at my front door with suitcases on the night of my housewarming party, and ending with Victoria's office the previous morning, and the 2 wills laid side by side on her desk. It took 45 minutes. Ramos filled 6 pages of his notepad and asked 4 questions, each one precise, each one aimed at a specific detail I had mentioned and not elaborated on. When I finished, he read back through his notes for a moment, then looked up. "The security footage," he said. "You mentioned a camera covering the upstairs hallway." 4 cameras total. Front door, back door, living room, upstairs hallway. I have the full archive on a hard drive. My attorney has copies. I'll need originals for the chain of evidence." He wrote something down. "The loan application at First Consolidated. Do you know which branch?" "Main Street, Yonkers. Victoria has the branch records." He nodded, made another note. "And the filing cabinet where he accessed your documents, is it still in your Yonkers apartment?" "I had it transferred here when I moved. It's in my office upstairs. Don't touch it, Ramos said. We'll want to process it for prints. He was closing his notepad when someone knocked at the back door. I excused myself and found Dorothy Mercer standing on my back porch in her good coat, not her house coat. Her good coat, the navy one she wore to church, holding a sealed envelope in both hands, the way you hold something you have thought carefully about before bringing. I saw the car in your driveway, she said, and her chin was set in the particular way of a woman who had decided something and was not going to be talked out of it. I figured it was official, so I finished it this morning. She held the envelope out to me. I took it. Dorothy, I've been a witness before Arthur. 30 years ago, in a property dispute that nearly cost my first husband everything he had. I know what they need, and I know how to write it. She pressed her lips together firmly. Everything I saw that night, the time I arrived where I was standing, what I heard Julian say, what I saw Chloe do on the stairs, all of it signed and dated. She paused. She took something off that nightstand. I saw her put it in her bag. I didn't say anything that night because I thought maybe I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong, was I? No, I said. You weren't. Dorothy gave a single sharp nod, the kind that meant the matter was settled and she was ready to move on to other business. Then make sure that detective knows my number. I'm available any day except Wednesday mornings. That's when I have my water aerobics class. I brought the envelope back to the kitchen table and handed it to Ramos. He read it carefully, both pages, and then looked at me over his reading glasses with an expression that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Your neighbor writes a very clear witness statement, he said. She's a very clear person, I said. By mid-morning, Victoria had sent her formal response to Tillman and Associates Julian's law firm, though calling a first-year associate working out of a shared office in downtown Yonkers a law firm was generous. The response letter was 4 pages long and listed in precise legal language. The following one, the educational funds in question, originated from the life insurance policy of Evelyn Ruth Calloway and were dispersed to Julian Calloway per documented beneficiary designation establishing no legal claim by Julian against Arthur. 2. The residential request constituted unlawful entry under New York Penal Law Section 140.10 as no prior consent had been given and Arthur had not relinquished possession. 3. The forged loan document constituted forgery in the second degree, a Class D felony currently under active investigation by the Westchester County Financial Crimes Unit. 4. The forged will constituted a separate felony offense under New York penal law and the Surrogates Court Procedure Act, also under active investigation. The letter concluded with a single sentence. My client looks forward to resolving these matters in the appropriate venue. Marcus called that afternoon while I was in the backyard, pulling up the last of the dead winter growth along the fence line, a project I had started the week before the housewarming and not gotten back to since. How are you holding up? He asked. I'm pulling weeds, I said. That's usually a good sign. He laughed, and it was good to hear him laugh. Julian called me this morning, he said, and just like that, the moment shifted. Wanted to know if I could talk to you. Said you weren't returning his calls. I straightened up and looked at the yard, the bare February ground, the Japanese maple at the corner still months away from any kind of green. What did you tell him? I told him I wasn't a messenger service, Marcus said. And then I told him he should get a real lawyer, not the friend he's currently using. Good advice. He didn't take it well. A pause. He sounded scared, Arthur. I picked up the pruning shears and got back to work. He should be, I said. My phone rang again at 4 p.m. Julian. I watched his name on the screen for 3 full rings, the pruning shears still in my hand, the February wind pulling at my jacket collar. Then I answered, because I had decided something while pulling weeds that this particular conversation needed to happen once cleanly before lawyers made it impossible. Julian. His voice came back thin and tight, like a wire pulled close to its breaking point. Dad, we need to talk. Just the two of us. No lawyers, no. Have your lawyer call mine, I said. Then I ended the call, set the phone in my jacket pocket, and went back to the fence line. The weeds didn't argue. I appreciated that about them. The call came on a Thursday morning in early April, 3 weeks after Detective Ramos had sat at my kitchen table and taken 6 pages of notes. I was making breakfast eggs, wheat toast, the same thing I had made every Thursday morning for 11 years, because Evelyn had started the habit, and I had never found a good reason to stop when my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't dialed in almost 2 years. Robert Calloway, my father's side queens. We exchanged Christmas cards and birthday texts and had not had a real conversation since my retirement party in 2022, which was how most of my extended family relationships worked at this point in my life. Cordial, distant, maintained through effort rather than proximity. Arthur. His voice had the particular quality of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was still not sure how to begin it. I need to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that I don't believe a word of it. The eggs started to burn. I moved the pan off the burner. Tell me, I said. People are talking. About you and Chloe. He said her name carefully, like it was something that might leave a mark. Julian and his in-laws have been saying things. At family dinners at the church they go to in Yonkers, apparently, to anyone who will sit still long enough. They're saying that you made inappropriate advances toward Chloe. That when she turned you down, you threw them out of your house in retaliation. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, a pair of mourning doves were working their way across the backyard, pecking at nothing in particular, with the unhurried patience of creatures who had nowhere specific to be. I watched them for a moment, because looking at something small and indifferent helped me stay in my body, when what I actually wanted was to put my fist through the wall. How many people have heard this? I asked. My voice came out steady, which surprised me the way my voice had been surprising me all month, calm on the outside while something entirely different moved underneath. I don't know exactly. A dozen more, maybe. Patricia Morrow has apparently been very thorough. Robert exhaled. Arthur, I told everyone at the table last Sunday that it was garbage, that I'd known you for 60 years and that you were the most decent man I'd ever met. But I wanted you to know it was out there. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen counter for a long time, with the burnt eggs still in the pan and my hands flat on the cold granite, and I let myself feel what I actually felt, which was something I had not given myself permission to do since the morning I found Evelyn's watch missing from the velvet box. It was not anger. Anger I could work with. Anger had a direction and a purpose, and it had been serving me reasonably well for the past 6 weeks. This was something older and heavier than anger. This was the specific pain of a man who had spent 64 years building a reputation for honesty and decency, and was now watching people he had known his whole life sit across dinner tables and wonder even briefly, even for the length of a single uncertain pause, whether there might be something to it. I thought about Evelyn. I thought about what she would have said if she had been standing beside me at that kitchen counter, and what she would have said was not something gentle or philosophical. Evelyn had been kind, but she had also been ferocious when the situation required it, and she would have looked at me with those gray eyes of hers and said very simply, "Then make them take it back." I called Marcus first. He picked up on the second ring, which was how Marcus always picked up, because he kept his phone in his shirt pocket, and had never in 30 years of friendship let it ring more than twice. "I heard," he said before I could speak. Dorothy called me this morning. Patricia Morrow has been running her mouth all over Brooklyn too, apparently. Not just family neighbors, her book club people at Julian's gym. My jaw tightened so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. How long has this been going on? Dorothy thinks at least 2 weeks. They started right after they received Victoria's letter. He paused. Arthur, they're scared. Scared people do stupid things. Scared people do felonies, I said. That's what they're already doing. I know. His voice was careful, the voice he used when he was about to say something he knew I needed to hear but might not want to. You need to call Victoria right now. Not tomorrow, not this afternoon, right now. I was already dialing. Victoria answered on the first ring. I told her what Robert had said and what Marcus had confirmed. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had come to appreciate most about her. She never performed the act of listening. She actually did it. When I finished, she said, "This is slander per se under New York law. That's a specific legal category that applies when false statements involve alleged sexual misconduct. In New York, slander per se does not require the plaintiff to prove actual damages. The harm is presumed by law because the nature of the statement is inherently injurious to reputation." She paused. Do you have any recorded conversations with Julian? Anything where he says something that contradicts this narrative? I thought about what Marcus had told me in October, before the housewarming, when he had called to tell me Julian had reached out to him, asking questions about my financial situation. Marcus had suggested I start keeping records of everything. I had, including phone calls. I recorded a conversation with Julian on March 21st. I said. He called asking to talk without lawyers. I have the full recording. New York is a one-party consent state, which means I had every legal right to record a call I was participating in without notifying the other party. There was a brief silence on Victoria's end that I had learned to recognize as the sound of a very good lawyer recalibrating. Send me that recording tonight, she said. And Arthur, I need you to go through every security camera file from the night of the party. Every single minute of footage. We are going to need to show people exactly what happened in that house because Julian and his in-laws have been telling a story, and the only thing that beats a story is the truth on video. I hung up and went back to the kitchen. The burnt eggs were still in the pan. I threw them out, washed the pan, and started over. Outside, the mourning doves were still there, still unhurried, still working their way across the grass, with the particular patience of things that had survived worse winters than this one and expected to survive more. I cracked 2 fresh eggs into the pan and watched them cook. Victoria arrived at 7 in the evening, carrying her laptop and a legal pad and the focused expression of a woman who had decided exactly what she was going to do and needed only the evidence to confirm it. I had spent the afternoon going through every minute of footage from the night of the housewarming, the way she had asked all 4 camera angles, nearly 4 hours of recording, sitting at my desk with a yellow legal pad of my own, and noting timestamps the way I used to note production figures in the early years at Callaway Industrial, methodical and without sentiment. I had found what I was looking for. More than what I was looking for. I set 2 mugs of coffee on the kitchen table and opened my laptop beside hers. She pulled her chair around to my side of the table so we could look at the same screen, and for the next 90 minutes, we worked through the footage together, Victoria making notes and asking me to pause and rewind at specific moments, her pen moving in the small, precise strokes of someone building an argument, 1 brick at a time. Camera 1 upstairs hallway, timestamp 8:47 in the evening. Julian came up the stairs first, carrying both suitcases, and walked directly into my bedroom, without pausing, without knocking, without any of the hesitation a person would show if they were uncertain whether they belonged somewhere. He had walked into my bedroom the way you walk into a room you have already decided is yours. Camera 2 master bedroom doorway, The wide-angle lens I had mounted in the upper corner of the hall caught the bedroom entrance at an angle. At 8:51, Chloe moved to the nightstand beside my bed. Her back was partially to the camera, but the motion was clear. She opened the drawer, removed the black velvet box, opened it, and transferred its contents to the inner pocket of her handbag. The whole thing took 11 seconds. 11 seconds to take the only thing of Evelyn's I had kept. Camera 3, living room, timestamp 8:32. Gerald and Patricia Morrow had settled onto my sofa in my living room, and Gerald was speaking to Dorothy Mercer with the relaxed authority of a host at his own gathering. Patricia had her hand on the arm of one of my guests, a woman from my old office named Carol, and she was laughing at something with the ease of a woman who felt entirely at home. Camera 4, front door, timestamp 8:17. Julian and Chloe arriving. No knock. The door opened, Julian entered, and the expression on his face as he crossed my threshold was not the expression of a son visiting his father's home. It was the expression of a man arriving somewhere he had been planning to arrive for a long time. "This one," Victoria said, and tapped the screen at the timestamp 8:17. "And this one." She tapped again at 8:51. "And this." Gerald on my sofa at 8:32. 90 seconds of edited footage. No audio, we keep the audio for the criminal case. Just images. Clean, clear, undeniable. "And you think posting it is the right move," I said. She sat back and looked at me. "Julian and his in-laws have been running a narrative for 2 weeks across Queens, Brooklyn, and Yonkers. They have a story, and they have been telling it to everyone who will listen. And right now, the people who love you are having to defend you based on nothing more than their belief in your character." She paused. "Your character is worth defending. But character plus evidence is worth considerably more." I looked at the screen. The timestamp at 8:51. Chloe's 11 seconds. "What do I write?" I asked. Victoria had already drafted the caption on her legal pad. She slid it across to me. It read, "My home, my housewarming party, my family." "I'll let you decide what you see." I read it 3 times. It was 6 words shorter than anything I would have written and twice as effective. I typed it exactly as she had written it, attached the edited 90-second clip, and held my cursor over the post button for a moment. "Once this goes up," I said, "it doesn't come back." "No," Victoria said, "it doesn't." I clicked post. For the first 40 minutes, nothing much happened. A handful of likes from people who followed me and happened to be awake, a comment from Dorothy saying simply, "I was there." Then something shifted. A share from Robert in Queens, another from a former colleague in White Plains. By 10 o'clock, the post had been shared 40 times. By 11, the comments were running 3 columns deep on my screen, and my phone had stopped buzzing individually and started vibrating in a continuous low hum against the table because the notifications were arriving faster than they could be counted. I did not read most of them. I did not need to. What I needed was already happening, the story Julian and his in-laws had been telling in dining rooms and church hallways was colliding with 90 seconds of footage that showed exactly who had walked uninvited into whose home and exactly what had been taken from whose nightstand. And the collision was loud enough to be heard all the way to Yonkers. Victoria had already submitted the formal slander complaint to the New York Supreme Court, Westchester County, that afternoon, a civil action for defamation per se, naming Julian Calloway, Gerald Morrow, and Patricia Morrow as defendants. The complaint documented the specific false statements, the venues in which they had been made, the identities of witnesses who had heard them, and the reputational harm to Arthur James Calloway, 64 years old, 31 years of professional service, no prior legal complaints of any kind. At 11:47, my phone lit up with a text from a number I did not have saved. It took me a moment to recognize the Queen's area code. "This is Patricia Morrow. We need to meet. This has gone too far." I set the phone face down on the table. Victoria was closing her laptop, tucking her legal pad into her bag. She paused when she saw my expression. "Patricia Morrow," I said. One corner of Victoria's mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile. "Of course it is," she said. 90 seconds of video and suddenly everyone wants to have a conversation." She snapped her bag closed. "Don't respond tonight. Let them sit with it until morning." After she left, I locked the front door and stood in the quiet of my kitchen for a while, the way I had stood the night of the housewarming, but this was a different kind of quiet. That night, the quiet had felt like something closing in. Tonight it felt like the moment after a long storm, when the air is clean and still, and the damage is visible, but the worst of it has passed. I picked up my phone. The notification count had climbed past 200. I put the phone back down, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed before midnight, for the first time in 6 weeks. Pastor Henry Cole called on a Tuesday morning 4 days after the clip went up, and 2 days after the notification count on my phone had climbed past 6,000, and I had quietly turned off all social media alerts because the number had stopped meaning anything specific, and started meaning only that something irreversible had happened and was still happening. "They reached out to me, Arthur," he said. His voice was the same voice it had been for the 22 years I had known him, unhurried, deliberate, carrying the particular weight of a man who had sat with people in the worst moments of their lives and had learned that what most people needed was not answers, but to be heard without judgment. All 4 of them, Julian, Chloe, and both Morrows. They want to arrange a family meeting. They asked me to mediate. He paused. "I told them I would ask you first. I want to be clear that I am not advocating for this, Arthur. I am simply the messenger." I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the backyard. The Japanese maple was beginning to show its first green of the season, small, tentative leaves at the tips of the branches, the kind of growth that looks fragile but isn't. "I'll do it," I said, "but on my terms." Pastor Henry Cole was 70 years old and had been the minister of the Westchester Community Church on Bronxville Road for 26 of those years. He was a tall man with a white beard trimmed close and hands that were large and still and always looked like they knew exactly where they were supposed to be. He had presided over Evelyn's funeral service, and what I remembered most from that day, more than the flowers, more than the readings, more than anything anyone had said, was the way he had simply stood beside me afterward while people filed past, not speaking, not touching, just present in the specific way of someone who understood that some grief required witness more than comfort. My terms were, the meeting would be held in the fellowship hall of Pastor Cole's church on a Saturday morning, with Raymond, Marcus, Dorothy, and 6 members of my extended family present as witnesses, Robert from Queens, and 5 others who had heard the rumors firsthand and deserved to hear the correction in the same rooms where the lies had been told. Gerald and Patricia would read a prepared statement. Julian and Chloe would be present. Victoria had drafted the statement herself, precise and unambiguous, and had made clear to their new attorney they had finally hired a real one, a woman named Sandra Okafor from a firm in Manhattan, that signing and reading it publicly was a condition of any consideration toward reducing the civil defamation claim. Sandra Okafor had apparently read Victoria's complaint, reviewed the footage, and advised her clients to comply without argument. The fellowship hall had 22 chairs arranged in a loose circle the morning of the meeting, the way Pastor Cole arranged chairs for any gathering where he wanted people to feel accountable to each other, rather than to a hierarchy. I arrived early, as I always do, and sat in the chair nearest the door, not to be close to the exit, but because I wanted to see everyone's face when they walked in. Raymond came first in his good jacket, the one he wore to court appearances and funerals. He squeezed my shoulder once and sat to my left without a word. Marcus came next, and then Dorothy, who had brought a small notebook and a pen, and set them on her knee with the businesslike efficiency of a woman who intended to remember this morning accurately. Gerald and Patricia arrived at 9:58, 2 minutes before the hour. Gerald's color was not good. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, which I found I had no particular feeling about either way. Patricia kept her eyes on the floor from the moment she entered. Julian came through the door behind them, and I watched his face the way you watch something you have been preparing yourself to see. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he had not lost weight or height in the months since February. But there was something in the way he carried himself, a compression around the shoulders, a downward pull at the corners of his mouth that made him seem like less than the full size of a person. He did not look at me when he came in. He found a chair across the circle and sat down and put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor between us. Chloe sat beside him, her posture straight and her expression sealed the way a person looks when they have decided that composure is the only thing they have left to control. Pastor Cole opened the meeting with a brief prayer, not performative, not lengthy, just 2 sentences asking for honesty and for the grace to receive it. Then he looked at Gerald and nodded once. Gerald stood. He was holding Victoria's statement in both hands, and his hands were not steady. He read it the way a man reads something he knows he deserves to read, not slowly, not with feeling, but with the particular flatness of someone who has been told exactly what the words need to be and has no room left to embellish them. He stated that he and his wife Patricia had made false and damaging statements about Arthur James Calloway to multiple individuals over a period of approximately 3 weeks in March and April of 2025. He stated that those statements were without factual basis. He stated that they were made with the intention of damaging Arthur's reputation and that they had caused harm to his standing within his family and community. He stated that he and Patricia retracted those statements fully and without condition. When he finished, the room was quiet, in the way rooms are quiet after something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Pastor Cole looked around the circle slowly. Does anyone have anything they would like to add? Nobody spoke. Robert caught my eye from across the room and gave me a short nod. Dorothy was writing in her notebook. Raymond was watching Julian with an expression I recognized. It was the expression he had worn at Evelyn's funeral when he was working very hard to feel something other than what he actually felt. I looked at Julian. He was still looking at the floor. At some point during his father-in-law's reading, his hands had moved from his knees to each other, and he was holding them together now in his lap, tight enough that the knuckles had gone pale. I had thought before this morning that I would feel something clear and defined when I saw him in this room. Anger, or relief, or the grim satisfaction of a debt collected. What I actually felt was more complicated and less useful than any of those things, a tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep, and beneath it so old and persistent, I had almost stopped noticing it. The grief of a father who had loved his son without reservation for 34 years and was only now beginning to understand that love and trust were not the same thing and had perhaps never been in Julian's case equally returned. Pastor Cole brought the meeting to a close at 10:37. People gathered their coats and spoke in low voices. Dorothy came to stand beside me and said nothing for a moment, just stood the way Pastor Cole had stood beside me after Evelyn's service. Then she said quietly, "Elena asked about you this morning, by the way. She said to tell you the offer for coffee still stands." I looked at Dorothy. Outside the fellowship hall windows, the May sunlight was coming through the trees at a low angle, laying long gold strips across the floor. "Tell her yes," I said. 3 weeks after the fellowship hall meeting on a morning in late May, when the weather had finally made up its mind to be warm and I had opened the kitchen windows for the first time since October. I was sorting through a pile of accumulated mail at the counter when a white envelope slid out from between a hardware store circular and my water bill and landed on the floor. I picked it up. The return address was a women's health clinic in Yonkers. The name on the envelope was Chloe Calloway. The delivery address was mine, Birchwood Lane, Westchester. I stood there for a moment, with the envelope in my hand, not opening it, because it was not addressed to me, and whatever was inside belonged to someone else's medical history. And even in the middle of everything that had happened, I was not willing to become the kind of person who opened other people's mail. I set it on the counter, stepped back from it, and called Victoria. She arrived within the hour, which was something I had come to understand was simply how Victoria Shaw operated. She treated urgency, the way other people treated courtesy, as a baseline expectation rather than an exceptional effort. She stood at my counter, looked at the envelope without touching it, and made a phone call while I made coffee. The call lasted 4 minutes. When she hung up, she put on a pair of thin latex gloves she produced from her bag, the way a person produces a pen, as though carrying them was obvious, and she opened the envelope carefully along the top seam. She read the single-page document inside, then set it on the counter facing me. It was a patient billing statement from Riverside Women's Health in Yonkers, dated January of 2025. The same month, Julian had called me in tears to tell me Chloe had lost the baby and needed stability and a real home, and that hearing those words had made me reach for the phone to call my contractor about converting the guest room before I had stopped myself and said I needed a few days to think. The statement showed a routine wellness examination, a standard annual appointment, a copay of $40. There was no mention anywhere in the document of a pregnancy. There was no mention of any complication, any loss, any treatment related to a prenatal condition. The diagnosis codes in the bottom left corner were the diagnostic codes of a healthy woman in her early 30s with no outstanding medical concerns. I read it twice. My coffee cup was in my hand, and I set it down on the counter because I did not trust my grip. She was never pregnant, I said. The document strongly suggests that yes. Victoria's voice was careful. She was a lawyer, not a physician, and she was precise about what evidence proved versus what it indicated. We cannot use this in court without proper authentication, and there are privacy considerations under federal health information law that govern how medical records can be obtained and used. But this is consistent with what I suspected, and it gives us a direction. She had already suspected. I looked at her. The timeline never quite worked, she said. Julian called you in January. If Chloe had experienced a pregnancy loss significant enough to require stable housing as a medical necessity, there would typically be follow-up appointments, referrals, documentation. When I requested Chloe's medical records through formal discovery channels last month, her attorney objected strenuously, which is her right, but the degree of resistance was notable. I thought about January. Julian's voice on the phone cracked and breathless in the way it used to crack when he was a teenager, and something had gone genuinely wrong. A voice I had not heard in years and had not questioned, because why would I question the sound of my son crying over a child he had lost? The kitchen window was open, and the morning air smelled like cut grass and someone 2 streets over using a grill for the first time this season. Ordinary things. The world going about its business, while I stood in my kitchen understanding that my son had borrowed the shape of my grief, the grief I had carried for Evelyn, for the grandchild I had never met, for every loss that a man accumulates by the time he is 64, and had used it as a tool. I pressed both hands flat on the counter and breathed. What do we do with this? I asked. Your private investigator confirmed something separately this morning, which is why I arrived as quickly as I did. Victoria folded the billing statement back into the envelope. He located gym membership records for Chloe at a facility in Yonkers. She has been attending regular sessions, including personal training, since November of last year. Her check-in records show she was present 3 times a week through January and February. She paused. Including the week Julian told you she had lost the baby and needed to rest. Raymond had been right. He had seen Chloe at the gym. He had told me months ago, and I had filed it away, and now here was the documentation that confirmed it, not as coincidence, not as misunderstanding, but as the deliberate, planned performance of a grief that had never existed. I picked up the phone and called Raymond. He answered on the second ring the way he always did. "Arthur," he said, and something in my voice must have told him immediately, because he did not ask how I was or what the weather was like. He just waited. "You were right," I said. "About the gym. About all of it." A long breath on his end. "I know," he said quietly. "I've known for a while. I just didn't want to be the one to make you see it before you were ready." "I'm ready," I said. "I know that too," he said. "What do you need?" "Nothing right now. Victoria is here. I just needed you to know." After I hung up, Victoria was already at my kitchen table with her laptop open, adding the billing statement and the gym records to the digital evidence folder she maintained for my case, a folder that had grown since February, from a USB drive with 4 camera angles to something that required its own organizational system with subfolders and cross-references and a running index that was now 11 pages long. "This goes to the DAA as evidence of premeditation," she said, without looking up from the keyboard. "They did not show up at your housewarming on impulse, Arthur. The fake pregnancy was designed to soften you before the main event. They were building toward that night for months." She clicked something and sat back. "Which means every single thing Julian did, the loan, the will, the occupation attempt, was part of a coordinated plan, not a series of bad decisions made in the moment." I sat down across from her and looked at the 11-page index on her screen. "How much more do we have?" I asked. Victoria looked up at me over her reading glasses with the expression she wore when she was about to say something she had been waiting for the right moment to say. "Enough," she said. "More than enough." The Tuesday morning in early June was clear and unremarkable, the kind of morning that asks nothing of you and offers a mild, pleasant nothing in return. I had been out in the backyard since 7, working on the garden beds along the south fence that I had been meaning to address since April. My hands in the dirt, the way Evelyn had always said, was the most honest way to spend a morning, when I heard the front doorbell ring at 9:43. 2 women stood on my porch. They were both in their mid-40s, dressed in business casual, the way people dress when they want to appear approachable without sacrificing authority. Blazers, low heels, lanyards with photo identification cards. The taller one held a manila folder and a clipboard. The shorter one had a tablet and a pen. "Mr. Calloway." The taller one smiled with the practiced warmth of someone trained to put people at ease in situations that were not easy. "I'm Miss Henley, and this is my colleague Ms. Park from the New York State Adult Protective Services Office in White Plains. We received a referral regarding your welfare, and we'd like to speak with you if you have a few minutes." The word referral landed in my chest with the particular weight of a word that sounds neutral but isn't. I looked at their identification cards. Both were legitimate, the APS insignia, the White Plains office address photographs that matched faces. I had been an operations director for 31 years, and I knew the difference between bureaucratic process and a bureaucratic weapon, and I understood in that moment, standing at my front door, with garden dirt still on my gloves, that what I was looking at was the latter, dressed up as the former. "Of course," I said. "Come in, I'll make coffee." I excused myself for 30 seconds while the kettle heated, stepped into the hallway, and sent Marcus a text that said only APS at my house. "Come now." He had been at my place twice in the past month, helping me clear brush from the property line, And I knew from 30 years of friendship that he kept his phone on his person every waking hour, and that now meant now. Ms. Henley and Ms. Park sat on my living room sofa, with their folders and tablet arranged on their laps, with the professional tidiness of people who did home visits regularly enough to have developed a system. I brought coffee, sat across from them, and placed my hands flat on my knees in the posture of a man who had nothing to hide and knew it. The referral, Ms. Henley explained, had been submitted anonymously through the APS online portal 3 weeks prior. It described Arthur James Calloway, 64 years old, as exhibiting signs of cognitive decline, including poor financial judgment, social isolation, and the estrangement of close family members in ways that suggested diminished capacity to make sound decisions. The referral recommended an evaluation to determine whether a guardianship assessment was warranted. She read this summary in the careful, neutral tone of someone who had been trained not to editorialize, and I listened to it in the careful, neutral posture of a man who was storing every word for later. "I appreciate you coming in person," I said when she finished. "Can I ask a few questions?" Ms. Henley nodded. "Of course." "The financial decisions referenced in the referral are those specified." She checked her folder. "The referral mentions a recent real estate purchase described as impulsive and the severing of financial support to immediate family members. I bought a house I had been saving for over 8 years, with documented funds from my retirement account, and the sale of my previous residence," I said. "The severing of financial support refers to my decision to stop allowing unauthorized individuals to access my property and finances, a decision I made in consultation with my attorney, Victoria Shaw of Shaw Elder Law in White Plains, following the discovery of multiple felony-level financial crimes committed against me by a family member currently under criminal investigation by the Westchester County Financial Crimes Unit. I have the case number if you would like it." Both women looked up from their folders at the same time. "You're represented by an elder law attorney?" Ms. Park asked. "I am. I also had a comprehensive cognitive capacity evaluation conducted in March by Dr. Franklin Webb at White Plains Medical Center." I stood, walked to my desk, and returned with a sealed document I had been keeping in the top drawer since Victoria had suggested I obtain it as a precautionary measure 4 months ago. "This is Dr. Webb's certified assessment. It confirms intact executive function, intact memory, intact judgment, and no indicators of any cognitive impairment. It was conducted voluntarily and is dated March 21st. I set it on the coffee table between us. Ms. Henley picked it up and read the cover page. Something shifted in her expression, not suspicion, not surprise exactly, but the specific recalibration of a professional who has arrived expecting one kind of situation and found another entirely. Marcus arrived at 10:04, exactly 21 minutes after my text, letting himself in through the back door, the way he had been letting himself in through my back door for 3 decades. He came through the kitchen, saw the 2 women on the sofa, and pulled a chair from the dining room, placed it beside mine, and sat down without being invited. And without explanation, the way a person sits when they are making a statement through presence rather than words. Ms. Henley looked at him. "Marcus Bell," he said pleasantly. "Retired. 31 years with Arthur at Callaway Industrial. I'm here as a friend." He folded his hands in his lap. "Please continue." The visit lasted 40 more minutes. I answered every question directly and without hesitation. I showed them the house clean, organized, well-stocked, every room exactly as a man of 64 who lived alone and took care of himself would keep it. I showed them the garden I had been working on that morning, the bookshelves I had spent 2 weekends organizing by subject, the meal plan I kept on the refrigerator because I had been tracking sodium since my TIA the previous November and took my health seriously. When they rose to leave, Ms. Henley paused at the front door. Mr. Calloway, she said, and her voice had lost the careful neutrality it had carried at the beginning of the visit and replaced it with something closer to candor. This is one of the more unusual referrals we have processed this year. The information in the referral does not correspond to anything I observed today. I appreciate that, I said. After they left, I called Victoria before I even closed the front door. They came, I said. I know. I've been expecting this for about 3 weeks. Her voice was clipped and precise. Our IT consultant traced the APS referral submission through the portal's metadata. The IP address originates from a residential account registered to Patricia Ann Morrow, 942 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn. A pause. We are adding filing a false report with a government agency to the civil complaint. In New York, submitting a knowingly false APS referral with the intent to initiate guardianship proceedings constitutes harassment of a vulnerable adult under Social Services Law, Section 473. I looked at Marcus, who was still sitting in the dining room chair he had pulled out, drinking his coffee with the unhurried satisfaction of a man who had done exactly what was needed and knew it. Add it, I said. Marcus called on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-July and said with the careful phrasing of a man relaying information, he had been given specific instructions about that someone with direct knowledge of Julian's financial activities wanted to meet with me in person and had asked him to make the introduction. He said the person had requested that I not bring Victoria, that no recording devices be present, and that the conversation be treated as a private matter between individuals rather than a legal proceeding. I told Marcus I would think about it. I called Victoria. She listened without interrupting, which was her way, and then said, "Go. Take nothing that looks like a recording device. But under New York one-party consent law, your phone in your pocket with a voice memo running is not a recording device. It's a phone." She paused. "And Arthur, don't agree to anything, don't promise anything, and don't let whoever it is know how much you already know." The meeting was at a golf club in Tarrytown, that Marcus was a member of a quiet wood-paneled place that smelled like old leather and cut grass, and the particular hush of money that had been around long enough to stop announcing itself. I arrived at 11 in the morning, expecting to meet a business contact, or possibly a private investigator working a parallel angle on Julian's finances. I did not expect Chloe. She was sitting at a corner table near the window, her back to the room, a glass of water untouched in front of her. She was wearing a gray blazer, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked from across the room exactly as composed as she had always looked. Straight, spine-controlled expression, the posture of a woman who had decided long ago that composure was armor, and had worn it so long she had forgotten there was a difference. Then I got closer and I saw her eyes. They were red-rimmed in the way that comes not from a single bout of crying, but from weeks of it, the kind of accumulated grief and exhaustion that no amount of composure can fully conceal at close range. She was holding her water glass with both hands, and her knuckles were pale, and when she looked up and saw me, her chin tightened in the specific way of a person fighting very hard to hold on to the last piece of something they know is already gone. I sat down across from her. I said nothing because Victoria had told me to let whoever it was fill the silence, and I had learned over 12 years of management that the person who speaks first in a difficult conversation is usually the one who needs something. "I didn't come here to ask for anything," Chloe said. Her voice was steadier than her eyes. "I want you to know that before I say anything else. I'm not asking for money, I'm not asking for mercy, and I'm not asking you to drop anything. I need someone to know the truth, and you're the only person left who it matters to." "All right," I said. She set her water glass down and pressed her palms flat on the table, the same gesture I noticed that I made when I needed something solid beneath me. "Julian owes $180,000 to 3 separate creditors. Two of them are private lenders out of Queens, the kind of people who don't use attorneys for collections. She said this the way you say something that frightens you, but that you have decided to say anyway. My parents arranged those loans. They told Julian it was bridge financing, that it would be paid back from assets he would have access to once we were established in your house. The leather chair creaked slightly as I shifted my weight. Outside the window, two men in polo shirts were crossing the fairway in a golf cart, unhurried, and entirely unaware that anything of consequence was happening 40 yards away. "The 30-day plan," I said. Something moved across Chloe's face, not quite surprise, but the adjustment a person makes when they realize the person across from them already knows more than they expected. "You know about that." "I know about that," I said. She exhaled slowly. "New York tenancy law. If a person occupies a residential property continuously for 30 days or more, they acquire legal tenant status regardless of whether a lease exists. The property owner cannot remove them without a formal eviction proceeding through housing court, which in Westchester County takes a minimum of 3 months and frequently longer." She recited this the way someone recites something they have memorized, not because they are proud of it, but because they have been living inside it for a long time. "My mother researched it. She's been researching New York property law for 2 years, ever since you mentioned to Julian that you were saving for a house. 2 years. The Japanese maple in my backyard had been there when I bought the house 14 months ago and was already fully grown. This plan had been growing longer." "Julian knew?" I asked. Chloe's jaw tightened. "Julian knew everything. He didn't design it. That was my mother and my father together, mostly my mother, but he knew." She looked at her water glass. "He told himself it was fair, that you had more than you needed, and we had less than we deserved. He told himself that story until he believed it, and by the time he believed it, he'd already signed his name to things that can't be unsigned." I thought about Julian at 22 in his college graduation cap, the way he had hugged me so hard I felt his ribs. I thought about Julian at 28, calling me from the hospital when Chloe had a minor procedure, voice tight with worry. I thought about the person who had done all of those things, and the person who had walked into my bedroom on the night of the housewarming with suitcases, and I tried to locate the line between them and could not find it, which was perhaps the most painful thing of all. "The watch," I said. "You told me in a text once that you didn't take it." Chloe's eyes filled and she did not blink them clear. She let the tears sit there, which told me more than whatever she was about to say. "I know what I said. I was still protecting him then." Her voice cracked at the edges now, the composure finally showing its seams. "It was Julian. He took it that night while you were downstairs with your guests. He thought it was worth money. I told him to put it back. He said everything in that house was going to be ours in 30 days anyway." She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment. "It wasn't worth money, was it?" "No," I said. "It wasn't." She nodded. A single tear ran down the side of her face, and she did not wipe it, just let it go the way you let something go when you're too tired to manage it anymore. I reached across the table and picked up a paper cocktail napkin from the small stack beside the water pitcher and set it in front of her without a word. She took it. We sat there for a moment, not in the silence of people with nothing to say, but in the particular quiet of two people who had just exchanged something true and were giving it the space it required. "Chloe," I said finally, "is there anything else I need to know?" She looked up at me. Her chin was steadier now. "Julian is going to lose everything. The private lenders are already calling twice a day. He has nothing to sell, nothing to leverage, and my parents are too deep in their own problems to help him." She folded the cocktail napkin precisely in half. "Whatever happens in court, whatever you decide to do, it's already done. The consequences are already in motion. I just needed you to know that the man who did this to you knew it was wrong. She paused. And I needed you to know that I knew it was wrong too. I just waited too long to say so. On the drive home, I called Victoria. She confirmed the 30-day plan, I said. Julian took the watch. Gerald and Patricia designed the whole scheme 2 years before the housewarming. Julian knew everything. I paused. I have the recording. Victoria was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, which for her was a long time. Arthur, she said carefully, Julian is going to need a very good lawyer. He's going to need more than that, I said, and watched Terrytown give way to the Bronx River Parkway under a flat July sky and said nothing else for the rest of the drive. The divorce filing came through on a Tuesday in early September, according to Victoria, who received the notification through the court system before I did. Chloe had retained an attorney in Manhattan and filed in Westchester County Family Court, citing irreconcilable differences, the legal language that means everything and nothing, at the same time the phrase people use when the real reasons are too complicated or too damning to put in a document. Julian had not contested it. Victoria told me this in the same factual tone she used for all case updates, and I received it in the same way, the way you receive information about something that was already finished before it was officially decided. I had been in bed for 2 hours, not quite asleep, when my phone rang at 2:14 in the morning. The name on the screen was Julian. I stared at it through 2 full rings. The room was dark except for the blue light of the screen, and the house was quiet, in the deep, specific way that houses are quiet after midnight, when you live alone and the sounds you're used to are only the sounds you make yourself. I had not spoken to my son since the night I told him to have his lawyer call mine, and ended the call while he was still forming his next sentence. I answered, "Dad." His voice came through the phone thick and unsteady, with the blurred edges of a man who had been drinking for hours rather than minutes. Not sloppy, not incoherent, but softened in the way that alcohol softens the particular defenses a person spends their sober hours maintaining. I had not heard Julian's voice in 7 months. It was still his voice. That was the thing that hit me first, before anything else, that it was still unmistakably his, the voice I had heard ask for a glass of water at 2 in the morning when he was 7 years old. The voice that had called me Dad for 34 years and meant it, whatever else had been true. "Julian," I said. A long pause. I could hear him breathing, hear what sounded like a window open somewhere near him, street noise below. He was at his apartment in Yonkers, I assumed, in the place he had moved back to after the housewarming, the same apartment he and Chloe had broken their lease on in February, when they had believed with total certainty that they would be living in my house by March. "Did you ever actually love me?" His voice cracked on the last word, not dramatically, not for effect, but in the small, involuntary way of a person who is asking a question they have been carrying for a long time. Or was I always just an obligation, something you did because you were supposed to? The question landed in the dark room and stayed there. I had thought, if I ever spoke to Julian again, that I would know what to say. I had rehearsed versions of this conversation in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, in the car on the Bronx River Parkway, in the backyard with my hands in the dirt. I had rehearsed the version where I was measured and clear. I had rehearsed the version where I said everything I had never said. What I had not rehearsed was this: the sound of my son's voice at 2 in the morning asking whether I had loved him, because it had never occurred to me that the answer would ever be in question. "I loved you the morning you were born," I said. "I loved you every morning after that. I loved you when you came to see my house and looked at my smart lock and memorized the code. I loved you when I found Evelyn's watch missing. I loved you when Victoria showed me 2 wills side by side on her desk." I stopped. Love doesn't stop, Julian. It just stops being enough to excuse certain things. He made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh, something in between the sound of a person who has been holding something tight for too long and has just let go of part of it. I knew it was wrong, he said. From the beginning I knew. Chloe kept saying and my in-laws kept saying that you had more than you needed and we had less than we deserved, and I let myself believe it, because it was easier than admitting I was just afraid. His voice dropped. I was afraid I was never going to have anything, and it felt like you had everything. Outside my bedroom window, the August had given way to September, the way it does in Westchester, not dramatically, but with a gradual cooling, the first suggestion of the season that was coming. I lay in the dark with the phone against my ear, and I let my son talk the way I had let him talk when he was small, and something had frightened him, and what he needed was not solutions, but to be heard. The 30-day plan, I said quietly. You knew about that from the beginning. A long pause. Yes. The loan from the bank. The will. Another pause. Longer. Yes. Your mother's watch. His breathing changed. Dad, Julian, I need you to say it. The silence stretched for 4 seconds. 5. Then, yes. I knew about all of it. I didn't start it, but I knew. And I didn't stop it because I told myself. I told myself that once we were there, once we were settled, I would make it right somehow. I would find a way to pay you back. To make it, I don't know, fair. His voice broke on the last word, cracked open completely, and what came out of the crack was something younger than the man I had been dealing with for 7 months. Something that sounded like the boy who used to be afraid of the dark and was not ashamed to say so. I'm sorry, Dad. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am. I was quiet for a moment. Not because I had nothing to say, but because some things require the space of a moment before you say them, and this was one of those things. I know you are, I said. The street noise from his window drifted through the phone, a car passing, voices somewhere below, the ordinary sounds of a city that does not stop for anyone's private reckonings. I thought about the photograph on my hallway wall, Evelyn and me at Montauk, 1989, laughing at something neither of us could remember. I thought about holding Julian in the delivery room, that furious, red-faced person who had not yet decided what kind of man he was going to be. I thought about what Evelyn would say if she could hear this call. Not the Evelyn who had been fiercely protective and righteously furious on my behalf. The other Evelyn, the one who had taught 4th grade for 26 years and had believed with the particular stubbornness of a woman who had seen it proven many times that people were capable of more than their worst moments. Get some sleep, Julian, I said. And in the morning get a real lawyer. Not for my case, for yours. You need someone who can help you navigate what's coming, and you need them now, not after it gets worse. Is there any way that you would ever— Good night, Julian, I said. I ended the call. I set the phone on the nightstand, beside the velvet box. The watch was back inside. It returned by the Westchester County property clerk in April, after being logged as recovered evidence, and I had placed it back in the box without ceremony, simply because that was where it belonged. I did not pick up the phone again that night. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around me, and I let myself feel completely, and without management, the specific grief of a father who had just heard his son tell the truth for the first time in a very long time, and could not do anything with it except hold it. It was the loneliest feeling I had known since the Tuesday morning Evelyn stopped breathing. And it was not the same thing as forgiveness. But it was not nothing either. I made the decision on a Thursday morning in early October, while I was standing at the kitchen window, watching the Japanese maple turn. It had gone exactly the color I had hoped it would, The deep saturated orange red of a fire burning at its steadiest, the color Evelyn had described to me once when she read about Japanese maples in a gardening magazine, and said very specifically that she wanted one someday in a yard that was actually ours. I stood there with my coffee, and I looked at the tree for a long time, and what I felt was not the satisfaction I had imagined feeling when I first saw it in October of the previous year, newly moved in full of plans. What I felt was something quieter and more complicated, a recognition that this tree was exactly what she had wanted, and that she would never see it, and that I had been living in a house that was built around a grief I had not fully acknowledged, and that it was time to stop. I called the realtor that afternoon. The listing went up on a Friday. The sign appeared on the lawn of Birchwood Lane on a Saturday morning at 9, and I stood on my porch with coffee and watched Dorothy Mercer see it from across the street. She stopped walking. She had been coming back from her morning constitutional, the same route she walked every day down to the end of the block and back, and she looked at the sign for a long moment. Then she looked at me. I nodded. She crossed the street, something she did not do on her morning walks, and came to stand at the bottom of my porch steps. She did not ask questions. Dorothy had never been a woman who asked questions when a situation was self-explanatory. "Where?" she said. "Montauk," I said. "Long Island. I found a place that looks out over the water." She pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was processing something she had not expected and was deciding how she felt about it. Then she said, "Evelyn would have liked that." "I know," I said. "That's why." Dorothy nodded once, the firm, conclusive nod that meant she understood completely and approved entirely, and walked back across the street to finish her constitutional. I had found the Montauk house 3 weeks earlier during what I had told myself was an idle Saturday of online browsing, but what had in fact been the specific search of a man who had already made up his mind and was looking for confirmation. It was smaller than the Birchwood Lane house, 3 bedrooms instead of 4, a narrow kitchen, a living room that opened through sliding glass doors onto a deck that overlooked a 50-yard stretch of private beach access. The previous owners had planted a vegetable garden along the south side of the house and abandoned it, and the beds were overgrown, but structurally sound, the kind of garden that needed attention rather than rebuilding. I signed the purchase contract on a Monday morning alone at a real estate office in East Hampton. The agent shook my hand and said it was a beautiful property, and I said I knew, and we were both satisfied with that exchange. The Westchester house sold in 11 days, faster than my realtor had predicted, to a family from the Bronx with 2 young children and a dog named Chester, who had bounded up my front steps during the showing with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of a creature for whom a house is simply a place where good things happen. I hoped the family would be happy there. I meant that sincerely, without reservation, the way you can mean something sincerely once you have stopped needing the object of it for yourself. The closing was on a Wednesday in mid-October. I signed the final documents at a title company office in White Plains, shook several hands I would never shake again, and drove back to Birchwood Lane for the last time to collect the remaining boxes Raymond and I had not yet moved. The house was empty by 4 in the afternoon. I did what I had known I would do. I walked through every room one final time slowly, the way you walk through something when you want to memorize it without being sentimental about it. The living room where 28 people had stood with drinks on the night the maple was just another tree outside. The hallway where the footage camera had recorded 11 seconds that changed everything. The master bedroom where the floors still held the faint rectangular impression of where my bed had stood for 8 months. I stood in that room for a while. The late October light came through the window at a low angle, the same window where I had stood the morning after the housewarming and watched the moving crew load Julian's luggage into their van. The room smelled like nothing, no perfume, no cedar, nothing, just house. I took the velvet box from my coat pocket and held it in my palm the way I had held it the morning I found it empty. The watch was inside the longines, the scratched crystal, the twice-repaired clasp. I opened the box and looked at it for a moment. "I found you a better view, Evelyn," I said. My voice sounded strange in the empty room, the way voices do when there is nothing to absorb them. I closed the box, put it back in my pocket, and walked out. Elena was waiting in the driveway. She had driven up from the city. She had an apartment in Riverdale, in the Bronx, where she had lived since her own divorce 12 years ago. And she was standing beside her car with a cardboard tray of 2 coffees from the place on Central Avenue, the same 24-hour diner Marcus had gotten coffee from the morning after the housewarming. I did not know whether she had chosen it deliberately. Knowing Elena, she had. "I figured you could use company for the last part," she said. She had helped me pack books 3 weekends ago, and the weekend before that she had driven me to East Hampton to look at the Montauk property when I mentioned I was going, and she had walked through the house with me and said nothing until we stood on the deck looking out at the water, and then she had said simply, "Yes, this one." And I had thought, standing there with the October wind off the Atlantic and Elena beside me in her blue coat, that Evelyn would have liked her too. I took the coffee she held out. We stood in the empty driveway of the empty house on Birchwood Lane and drank our coffee in the kind of comfortable quiet that takes years to build with a person, or arrives occasionally as a gift between 2 people who have both learned the hard way that the world does not slow down for anyone's grief, and that company, when it is the right company, is not the same thing as interruption. Raymond pulled up in his truck at 4:30 to collect the last of the boxes. He loaded them in 20 minutes, moving with the efficient purposefulness of a man who had helped people move before and understood that the kindest thing you could do was be fast and not make it into an occasion. When the truck was loaded, he came to shake my hand. He held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. "She'd be proud of you," he said. I looked at him. Raymond had known Evelyn for 28 years, had watched her fight, and had stood beside me at her grave. And when he said something about her, he meant it with a precision that most people reserve for sworn statements. "I know," I said. He nodded, got in his truck, and drove away. Elena and I drove to Montauk in tandem, her car behind mine, headlights in my rearview mirror, all the way down the Long Island Expressway, as the October dark gathered around us, and the city fell away behind, and the road ahead narrowed toward the water. I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand in my coat pocket, the velvet box warm against my fingers the whole way. The first morning in the Montauk house, I woke at 5:47 to the sound of the ocean. Not the idea of the ocean, not the distant suggestion of it, the way you hear water from far enough away that it could be anything, but the actual ocean, close enough that I could hear individual waves gathering and releasing against the shore beyond the deck, a sound so steady and so indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 9 months, that lying there in the gray pre-dawn listening to it felt like the first genuinely quiet moment I had experienced since February. I lay still for a while. The ceiling of the bedroom was lower than at Birchwood Lane, the room smaller, and the window faced east, so the first light came in early and gray and clean. The velvet box was on the nightstand, where I had placed it the night before, which was the first thing I had unpacked before the sheets, before the kitchen things, before anything else. I made coffee in a kitchen that still smelled like cardboard from the unpacked boxes stacked along the counter, found the certified letter from yesterday's mail that I had left unopened on the table, and sat down. The return address was Julian's apartment in Yonkers. I opened it. 3 pages handwritten on lined notebook paper in Julian's handwriting, the same handwriting I had watched develop from a child's unsteady print to a teenager's careless scrawl, to this, the careful, deliberate letters of a man writing something he had drafted and redrafted before committing to ink. The pages were slightly wavy in the way paper goes when it has been handled many times. The first page was an apology. It was taken on its own terms, a genuine one, specific about what he had done, clear about accepting responsibility, written without the deflections and qualifications that characterize apologies that are really arguments. He named each thing: the loan, the will, the watch, the housewarming, the fake pregnancy he had gone along with, because Chloe had asked him to, and he had told himself it was for the right reasons. He wrote that he understood if I never forgave him, and that he was not writing to ask for forgiveness, only to say the things that should have been said in September on the phone, when he had been drunk enough to be honest, but not sober enough to say it all. I read that page twice. The second page was an explanation. This was where the letter began to shift in the way that certain letters do when the person writing them cannot quite sustain the purity of what they started with. Julian wrote about the pressure he had felt, the fear, the way his in-laws had made the plan sound reasonable over months of careful conversations, the way Chloe had framed it as correcting an imbalance rather than taking something that wasn't theirs. He wrote about feeling invisible beside me, about growing up, believing that my competence and my self-sufficiency were a standard he could never meet, about the specific pain of a son who loves his father and cannot figure out how to say so without the love becoming the thing that diminishes him. There were things in that page that were true. I recognized them as true the way you recognize something true that you would rather not have to reckon with. There were also things in that page that were the second page of a letter that started as an apology. I recognized those too. The third page was the one that told me everything I needed to know about where we actually were. Julian wrote that the private lenders his in-laws had arranged were making collections calls twice daily. He wrote that his bank accounts were overdrawn, that his landlord in Yonkers had served him a notice to cure for back rent, that the criminal case Victoria was pursuing had made it effectively impossible for him to find employment in any financial or administrative role. He wrote that he had no one left to ask. He wrote that he knew he had no right to ask. He wrote in the last paragraph that if there was any part of me that still thought of him as my son, not the person who had done these things, but the boy I had held in the delivery room, the boy who had called me dad for 34 years, that he was asking me as that boy to help him. I set the letter down on the table. Outside the kitchen window, the October sun had cleared the horizon and was laying a long, flat gold path across the water that stretched to the end of what I could see. The ocean moved the same way it had been moving for as long as there had been an ocean to move, without memory, without agenda, without the faintest awareness of what any of us had put each other through on the land above its shore. I thought about the boy in the delivery room. I thought about him clearly and without sentimentality, the way you can think about something clearly once you have finished grieving it. Then I stood up, went to my study, the small room off the hallway that I had designated when I signed the purchase contract as the room where I would keep my desks and my books and the filing cabinet that Detective Ramos had cleared and returned after processing, and I took the document shredder out of the moving box it had traveled in from Birchwood Lane. I set it on the desk. I plugged it in. I opened my phone, set it on the bookshelf facing the desk, and opened the camera. Then I went back to the kitchen, picked up Julian's letter, all 3 pages in order, and carried them to the desk. I fed the first page into the shredder. The machine took it with the clean mechanical certainty of something designed for exactly this purpose, the motor rising briefly to a higher pitch as the paper caught and then settling back as the page disappeared into the collection bin below. I fed the second page the same way, no pause, no ceremony, the same steady motion you use when you are doing something you have already decided about and do not need to reconsider. The third page, the one with the request, I held for a moment, not out of hesitation, out of the specific acknowledgement that this was the page that mattered most to Julian when he wrote it, and that it deserved for that reason to be fed into the machine with the same deliberate care as the other two. I fed it in. The shredder ran for 4 seconds. Then it stopped, and the room was quiet except for the ocean through the open study window. I picked up my phone, ended the recording, and sent the video to Julian's number with no accompanying message. Then I blocked the number. I stood at the study window for a moment and looked at the water. The gold path the morning sun had made across the surface was wider now. The light growing with the hour and the garden beds along the south wall of the house were catching the first warmth of the day. The overgrown beds that had been left by the previous owners, the ones that needed attention rather than rebuilding. I thought about what Evelyn would have planted there. Tomatoes, certainly. Sunflowers along the back fence. Maybe herbs near the kitchen window where she could reach them without going far. I was still standing at the window thinking about this when Elena knocked at the front door she had stayed at a bed and breakfast in Montauk Village the night before, giving me the first morning alone the way a person does when they understand, without being told, what someone needs. She was holding 2 coffees from a bakery on Main Street, and she was wearing her blue coat. And when I opened the door, the October air came in with her salt and cold and entirely clean. "First real morning," she said, and held out the coffee. I took it. "Come see the garden," I said. "I want to know what you think we should plant." She stepped inside and I closed the door behind her, and the ocean kept going the way it always did. The way it would keep going long after all of this was nothing but sediment, patient and enormous and completely unconcerned. 3 months into the Montauk house, I had established what I could only describe as a life. Not the performance of moving on that people mistake for the thing itself, but an actual life with actual rhythms and actual pleasures. Elena had planted tomatoes along the south fence and sunflowers along the back wall that never bloomed before winter, but stood brown and dignified like sentinels keeping their position through a difficult season. She came on weekends sometimes, staying through Monday, and on those days the house smelled like whatever she was cooking and sounded like a house that had someone in it, which turned out to be something I'd missed more than I allowed myself to know. Victoria called in December. The DA had filed formal charges against Julian in November, forgery in the 2nd degree, on 2 counts, grand larceny in the 3rd degree, and criminal possession of stolen property. Julian had entered a not guilty plea, standard procedure, and a pre-trial conference was scheduled for February. Gerald and Patricia had quietly settled the civil defamation claim, agreeing to distribute a written retraction to every person they had contacted with their lies. Patricia had moved to New Jersey. Gerald was managing a storage facility in Queens. I did not find any of this satisfying the way I once imagined I might. I found it accurate. There is a difference. Pastor Cole sent a handwritten letter in late November. Near the end, he wrote one sentence I had already copied onto a note card above my desk. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means you stop letting their poison run through your veins. I called Victoria on a Thursday evening in mid-December. "Tell his attorney I'll support a plea to reduce charges," I said. "2 conditions, full restitution on a court-enforced payment schedule, and he completes whatever counseling the court recommends fully." I paused. "I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it because a trial serves no one, and I would like this chapter to close." Elena appeared with 2 mugs of tea afterward. She set one on my desk and looked at the water going dark outside. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Lighter," I said. Outside, the sunflower stalks stood in the dark like they intended to be there in the spring, too. The last night of the year came in quiet over the water. I stood on the back deck at 11:58, coat buttoned against the December cold, and watched the Atlantic move in the dark, the way it always moved, without memory, without grievance, without the faintest interest in what any of us had put each other through on the land above its shore. Somewhere to the west, Fireworks were going up over Montauk Village, brief colors against the clouds, there and gone. I thought about the year. Not all of it. You cannot hold a year like this one all at once. But the parts of it I needed to carry forward, and the parts I had already set down. I thought about Julian. Not with anger, not with the cold satisfaction of a man who has won something. With the specific sadness of a father who understands finally and completely that loving someone and trusting them are not the same thing, and were perhaps never the same thing, where his son was concerned, and that this understanding, as painful as it was, had cost less than the alternative. I thought about Evelyn. I thought about her the way I thought about her every day, not as a loss, not anymore, but as a presence. The woman who had pressed a watch into my palm and asked me to remember she had been here. I was still here too. The watch was on my wrist. I had started wearing it every day the week we moved to Montauk, because the velvet box had done its work, and what the watch needed now was not to be kept, but to be worn. The crystal was scratched. The clasp had been repaired twice. It kept perfect time. Elena came through the sliding door and stood beside me close enough that her shoulder touched mine. She did not say anything. She looked at the water the way I was looking at it, and in the dark I could see her breath and mine rising together and dissipating in the same cold air. Midnight came. The fireworks to the west grew briefly louder and then began to quiet. I had spent 64 years building a career, a marriage, a son, a home. And in 1 year I had learned that what you build does not define you. How you protect it does, and what you choose to walk away from. She told me to keep the watch so I would remember she was here. I keep it now so I remember I am still here too. If this grandpa story taught me anything, it is this: the people who love you should never make you feel like a fool for trusting them. I spent 64 years being decent, working hard, and believing that family meant something permanent. I was wrong about the permanence, but I was not wrong about the decency. God has a way of making sure the truth surfaces eventually. You just have to be standing when it does. Here is what I wish someone had told me sooner. Do not wait for people to show you who they are a second time. The first time is enough. Set your boundaries early, protect what you have built, and never confuse loyalty with surrender. This family story is mine. But the lesson belongs to anyone who has ever loved someone who treated that love as a weakness. If you see yourself in Arthur's story, in his patience, in his silence in the morning, he finally stopped waiting for an apology that was never going to come. I hope you find your own Montauk, your own fresh start, your own reason to keep the watch on your wrist instead of in the box. These grandpa stories exist because real life is complicated and family story is rarely simple. If something here moved you, leave a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and understanding. If that is not the content for you, no hard feelings, find what speaks to your heart instead.